Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the CJA-CJN federal election debate. My name is Tamara Fathi, and I am pleased to be here with you this evening. For over a decade, I have been actively engaged as a lay leader in the Jewish community in Ottawa, the city I call home, internationally through the World Jewish Congress, and nationally through CIJA, where I served on the board and co-chaired the CIJA Young Leaders Circle. I am active in our community for the same reason you joined this call. I care deeply about Canada's Jewish community, and like you, I deeply believe Jewish Canadians have an important contribution to make to Canadian democracy. CIJA is the advocacy agent of Jewish federations across Canada. Our mission is to protect the quality of Jewish life in Canada through advocacy. We are pleased to partner with the CJN on this election debate. If you are not receiving the Canadian Jewish newsletter, I recommend you visit the CJN's new website at thecjn.ca and subscribe. All the Jewish community news in your inbox a couple of times a week. Before I introduce our moderators, some housekeeping. First, I would like to draw your attention to the CIJA Election Hub, linked below and in the chat. On the website, you will find CIJA's Federal Election Issues Guide, which includes questions you can pose to your local candidates on issues of concern to our community. You will also find links to the federal party platforms. And perhaps most importantly, you'll find information about how to vote, when to vote, and where to vote. If you are unable to vote on Election Day, which is 1 week today, you can vote by mail. But to do so, you have to apply before 6 p.m. tomorrow, Tuesday the 14th. Tomorrow is also the last day to vote in advance of any of the more than 500 Elections Canada offices across the country. You can learn more about both advanced voting options at cija.ca/election. And finally, I encourage you to participate in this discussion through the chat of this webinar. We want to hear from you. And now our moderators. Ellin Bessner is the host of the CJN Daily podcast on the CJN network. Ellin is a veteran journalist based in Toronto who has worked for CBC and CTV News. She has been a professor of journalism for nearly 20 years at Centennial College and is the author of Double Threat, a book about the 17,000 Canadian Jewish soldiers who fought in the Second World War and defeated Hitler. Avi Finegold is a Canadian rabbi from Montreal. Avi founded the Jewish Living Lab for Adult Jewish Education, has served as executive director of the Montreal Board of Rabbis, and from July 2017 to 2018 served as interim rabbi of the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue of Montreal. In 2021, Avi started a podcast with the Canadian Jewish News called Bonjour Chai, a weekly current affairs program discussing topics relevant to the Canadian Jewish community. I think you'll agree, great moderators for tonight's debate. Avi, Ellin, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Tamara, for your kind introduction. Hi, Avi, and thank you as well to all of the folks at the CJA and the CJN network who have made this virtual E-lection 2021 national debate possible.
And hello to everyone who's watching the debate live with us, and also to those of you who will be watching it later on demand. And a warm welcome and thank you to the candidates who have agreed to be part of this conversation.
So let's review the outline for the evening. First of all, the first hour is our candidates debate. The last half hour is a post-debate analysis by our CJN and CIJA pundits. So talking about the debate format, first of all, the first segment, each candidate will get 90 seconds to give an opening statement. And then we'll move into the next longer segment, about 35 minutes long, where we'll ask the candidates to have a serious discussion about issues ranging from Canadian foreign policy, anti-Semitism, Israel, climate change, and so many more. Indigenous issues, of course, and housing. And we'll try to fit them all in. During the course of the debate portion, we're going to be highlighting questions that you have submitted in advance. Now, we may not get to all of them, and we thank you all so much for the videos and your emails. I also invite you all to feel free to join in the live chat. So please type in your questions during the night into the Zoom chat during the debate itself.
At the end of the debate at 8:30, the candidates will take their leave, and we then invite you to join the lively post-debate analysis with the CJN personalities, Rivka Campbell and Joshua Lieblein, and with CIJA's Vice President of Government Relations, David Cooper. That goes for about 30 minutes until 9. We'll be polling the audience on some general election topics before the analysis, and we also invite you to use the chat to tell us what issues are of importance to you in this election. We should note that while we may be asking a question first to a specific candidate, we'll then invite the others to respond and discuss the matter in a respectful manner for a fixed amount of time. We'd like to begin by introducing our candidates alphabetically. Please note that we did send out invitations to all parties using the Federal Election Debate Commission's guidelines. The Green Party and the Bloc Québécois did not make a candidate available to us by the deadline. However, Green Party leader Annamie Paul has sent in a video greeting, which we will play now.
Hello, my name is Annamie Paul, and I'm leader of the Green Party of Canada. Bonjour, je m'appelle Annamie Paul. Je suis chef du Parti Vert du Canada. I'm greeting you today on the beautiful island of Prince Edward Island on the East Coast, and it is unfortunately the reason that I could not be with you this evening. I want to congratulate CIJA and CJN on this event, and as a member of the Jewish community, as the first Jewish woman to lead a federal party, I am so proud of the efforts in the community to be involved and engaged in this election because it matters. It matters because we care about our climate. It matters because the community cares about ensuring a life of dignity for everyone. And it matters because we know that within our community and others, that hate is rising, that intolerance is rising, and that we need to raise our voices. And so you can count on me and our party to be strong representatives of the community and for the community. I congratulate you on the event. I can't wait to be with you again soon. Shana Tova, and enjoy the evening.
All right, so we apologize a little bit for the windy PEI sound, but you could read the subtitles. All right, so for the folks who are with us tonight, we are joined by the representative of the New Democratic Party of Canada, who will start first. Let me introduce you to Dr. Hal Berman. Dr. Berman is a Toronto area palliative care physician. He's running in the Willowdale riding. This is his third election. Dr. Berman, your 90 seconds opening statement begins now.
Shalom Aleichem Unagutio. It's an honor to be here tonight representing the New Democratic Party. The CCF and the NDP have a long association with the Jewish community. In 1939, it was only J.S. Wordsworth and the CCF who stood up in Parliament to demand that Canada take part or to take in Jewish refugees on board the St. Louis. Mackenzie King's failure to act led to tragic deaths. David Lewis, the second leader of the NDP, was the first Jewish leader of a major federal party. His son and now his grandson have represented the party. His daughter, Janet Sahlberg, has provided excellent leadership in the party at many levels. It was a member of the NDP, Judy Washalis, who tabled the first bill to designate Yom HaShoah as an annual National Holocaust Remembrance Day. And in 2015, I ran for the NDP for the very first time. New Democrats appreciate the enormous contribution that the Jewish community has made to building our country, from agriculture to industry to the arts. We are celebrated as an essential part of our multicultural heritage. And yet we face challenges unlike any other time. The rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes is frightening to me. I want my children to grow up confident in their culture and proud to be Jewish. New Democrats share this aspiration with me, and I feel confident that Jagmeet and the rest of our team are committed to the same goals. Ashen Dank.
Thank you, Dr. Berman. Now from the Wellington-Halton Hills riding, representing the Conservative Party of Canada, is the Honourable Michael Chong. Mr. Chong is a former cabinet minister under former Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Mr. Chong is currently shadow critic for foreign affairs. Mr. Chong, your opening remarks, please.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank the Canadian Jewish News and the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs for organizing tonight's debate. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, for those of you who don't know me. My father was a Chinese immigrant from Hong Kong to Canada, and my mother was a Dutch immigrant. Both my parents were defended and liberated by Canadian soldiers during World War II against the tyranny of fascism. My parents instilled in the four of us, their four children, a deep belief in this country and the principles on which it is based. This election is the choice between our current track or a comprehensive conservative plan to deliver jobs for all Canadians and to tackle our high levels of debt and unemployment. This election, I ask you to ask yourself, Who do you trust to create jobs and get Canada's economy back on track? Who do you trust to get Canada out of the economic recession of the last year and the last quarter? Who do you trust to make life more affordable? We have a plan to get Canada back on its feet and rebuild our economy, our jobs, and our way of life. I look forward to the debate, and thank you for coming.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Chong. And now from the Liberal Party, representing the riding of Eglinton Lawrence, we have the Honourable Marco Mendicino. He was named Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship in November of 2019. Thank you so much, welcome, and it's time for your opening remarks.
Well, thank you, and to CIJA and CJN for hosting this debate, and Shana Tova to my family and friends, especially those in my home riding of Eglinton Lawrence, where I'm seeking re-election. Under the leadership of Shimon Fogel, CIJA has become a critically important educator, advocate, and partner to the government. I took my very first trip abroad as an MP to Israel with CIJA. Will never forget my solemn visits that I paid to Yad Vashem and the Western Wall. My second trip to Israel, I spoke in the Knesset in my capacity as the vice chair for the Canada-Israel Friendship Group. Those trips were memorable, inspiring, and happily bipartisan. Now, many of you know me. I am a friend. I am proud of my close relationship with the Jewish community. I am gravely concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism. And what you need to know is that the Liberal Party has a plan. We adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and we're fully implementing it. We quadrupled funding under the SIP, and we're going to continue to find ways to partner with our local institutions to ensure their safety. We appointed Erwin Kotler as our special envoy on anti-Semitism, and we are going to legislate against hate speech. Now, I will make sure that I bring my skills and experience as a former federal prosecutor to the fore in ensuring that we tackle anti-Semitism in its many forms. I've also helped to strengthen the Canada-Israel relationship by speaking at the Knesset, by advocating for the expansion of trade, including on innovation. And I believe we need to keep strengthening the people-to-people ties, including under immigration policy, which is near and dear to my heart as the son of an immigrant family. I'm seeking re-election as the MP for Eglinton Lawrence so I can stand with you to fight anti-Semitism, but we're also going to finish the fight against the pandemic, protect universal health care, protect our communities from gun violence, take bold action on climate change, introduce a $10 a day national child care plan, and focus on economic recovery. That's how we're going to move forward, and that's why I hope on September 20th you'll re-elect me and our party. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mendicino. I mentioned civility before, and as a way to set the tone for the debate, I'd like to start by pointing out that Judaism has a long history of respectful discourse, of preserving losing opinions because we care about them and we value them for the insights that they can teach us. We can and should debate ideas with vigor while still maintaining our respect for each other. We'd like to ask the candidates to be mindful of this, and we thank you in advance.
All right, so let's get to it. We are going to start our first key topic tonight, of course, as you just alluded to, anti-Semitism. It has been an uncomfortable and I would say deeply disturbing few months for Jews around the world and in Canada since May of this year, when hostilities between Israel and Hamas touched off that surge of online as well as physical incidents of anti-Semitism. Mr. Mendicino, even your riding of Eglinton Lawrence was not immune, with the Jewish synagogue Beth Shalom having graffiti. Now, you did, Mr. Mendicino, outline some policies, of course, that your Liberal Party has done or taken on this issue. But there's more to be done, especially on things like hate speech, online hate. So starting with you, you get about 2 minutes. How will the Liberal Party, if re-elected, help Jewish Canadians not only feel safe, but also safe online from this kind of anti-Semitic hatred we're seeing?
Well, first, this is a very personal issue for me because, as you pointed out, it hits close to home. And in addition to Beth Shalom, we've seen young boys attend a Chabad right around the corner from my constituency office who were physically harassed. And, you know, I reached out to the community to stand with them. And I think it is important that political leaders of all stripes condemn anti-Semitism in a very full and clear-throated manner. Now, we have a plan in our platform. That plan is clear. We will introduce legislation to tackle online hate. We will do that within the first 100 days. I will ensure that my experience as a former federal prosecutor working on cases of national security will inform the implementation of that legislation so that we can keep communities safe. But as I said, we have also implemented IHRA, the definition of anti-Semitism, which captures the evolving nature of anti-Semitism, where we see kids on campus, students at schools. And I've spoken with so many families who are so concerned and anxious about their ability to send their kids to school and the students themselves. So we need to be sure that we are taking the next steps to implement IRA. We also are going to continue to look at ways to innovate the security infrastructure program, which we quadrupled under our government and which we also use to expand the eligible activities to ensure that communities are protected. So these are the ways in which we are going to be sure that we fight anti-Semitism. I would just simply note that the Conservative Party platform is entirely silent on the use of the term anti-Semitism. It's not enough to say that you will do it. You have to show people how you're going to do it. And our Liberal platform does exactly that.
All right, well, thank you very much. You were mentioning Bill C-36, which died on the order paper. There was criticism of it. We'll get to that. Maybe Mr. Chong would like to pick up here. We'll get to it about making sure that the online companies are also held to account, which Bill C-36 did not do. All right, Mr. Chong, you were called, so let's give you the opportunity to talk about what will happen to all the commitments that were made in this summer to Canada's Jewish community with the Anti-Semitism Summit, July 21st. If your party gets elected, what happens to these commitments?
Well, I think standing up to hate and discrimination in all its forms is really important. Let me just say this. I was born to a Chinese father, and I'm a visible minority who grew up in this country and who has the lived experience of being targeted for my race. And I know firsthand what it's like to be, subject to that kind of hate and discrimination. And so we as conservatives believe strongly in standing up against that hate and discrimination. And, look, my father came here in 1952, 4 years after the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed. And thankfully, we've left that era of our history behind, but there's still more work to do. So we are committed to continuing with programs like the SIP to ensure that they support minority communities and providing them with additional protections against targeted hate and discrimination. We support better resources for law enforcement to enforce the existing laws on the books so that those who would spew this hatred are prosecuted and held accountable. And we're supportive of taking a look at other new measures, new programs based on examples like those used in the United Kingdom, such as the Community Security Trust that's been so helpful in enhancing the cooperation of the community being targeted with law enforcement and with the government to ensure that we can counter some of these threats that we're seeing. And look, better enforcement, better resources for the community, I think are the way to go. The recent, the attack that was preempted on the congregation in Montreal is an example of how better resources and programs will actually work to protect the community.
All right, thank you. I want to bring in Dr. Berman now because we've just mentioned better resources for the police, and anyone who had a chance to read the NDP's platform talks about beefing up hate crime units in the police forces across Canada. Dr. Berman, could you speak to that and how the NDP is going to deal with anti-Semitism?
So I would just like to say, I don't disagree with anything that Michael Chong has said. I don't disagree with anything that Mr. Mendicino has said. I don't think that anti-Semitism is a partisan issue. I don't think anybody in their right mind would be in favor of anti-Semitism. And so I don't think this needs to be our party will do this, our party will do that. In fact, our idea is that we should all come together to fight anti-Semitism. So we were very disappointed when the emergency summit on anti-Semitism was called, that the only Jewish leader of a federal party was not invited to participate. I know she's not a member of the NDP, but it still kind of hurt that the only leader who could have possibly experienced anti-Semitism was not invited to be an active participant in that. And that's just not right. We shouldn't be making this something for political gain. It should not be a partisan issue. We should all be working together, because if we make this political, then all it does is cause more fighting and more conflict, and we get nowhere.
All right, thank you very, very much, all three of you. We'll turn it over to my colleague Avi for our next segment.
So as our next major topic, as the Jewish people are very familiar with being an other in a society and the violence and the erasure that comes along with it. Jewish Canadians are acutely invested with how we treat the country's Indigenous population. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued 94 calls to action, and to date, only 13 have been completed. Over 20 have not even been touched. I had Nakuset, an Indigenous leader with Jewish heritage, on my podcast earlier this year, and she made the point that these calls to action were basically used as election promises, and no one in the Indigenous community even believed that they'd get done. This year, we've brought increased scrutiny as a result of the discovery of mass graves on the grounds of residential schools. And while the country is still grappling with this, already there are calls to raise flags, and there's fear that momentum may be dissipating on this. What is your party pledging to do for this? And more importantly, what sort of accountability can there be to make sure that there is follow through on any of your pledges? And I'd like to offer this question to all the candidates. I'll start with Mr. Berman, followed by Mr. Chong, and finally Mr. Mendicino.
Thank you. So, as with many other issues, this again shouldn't be a partisan issue. It breaks my heart that while all the parties are fighting about who is going to take care of the Indigenous population, that nobody is taking care of the Indigenous population. And there was a famous exchange back in the last election when somebody asked, "Are you writing a blank check?" to Jagmeet Singh when he was talking about water, clean water for people. And he said, if this was Toronto, this wouldn't be a question. Why is it always we look at dollars and how much it's going to cost when it's for the Indigenous population, but we don't seem to care? We put in hundreds of billions of dollars into COVID-19, into the CERB, into all of these different aids. How many corporations got billions of dollars and then gave away money to their shareholders? And yet we still have many communities that don't have clean drinking water. It's as Jagmeet said a few days ago in the debate, it's a disgrace. The Indigenous Canadians have been ignored for centuries by the settlers, by the colonists. We have done things for our own benefit, not for their benefit. And it's okay to say things. I mean, every party that has been in power, so not the NDP, has had responsibility for this. And it's okay to say that we got to do better. And I'm glad that the Prime Minister has said that. But his actions speak much louder than the words. We can't be taking Indigenous children to court and telling people we care about Indigenous survivors of residential schools. Those two things are at odds with each other. We have to start doing what we're saying. We have to start seeing what Indigenous Canadians need. We have to make sure all the calls to action are heeded, and we have to start taking our role and our responsibility seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Chong.
Well, thank you for the question. It's an important one, and we all have a responsibility to do better for Canada's Indigenous peoples. Some of the things that we are proposing to do is to build on the work of the current government and past governments to improve outcomes on reserve. There are some 650 bands across Canada, and each of them is of a different scale and scope. Some have, several dozen members, others have hundreds and tens of thousands of members, and so they all have different capacities and different resources available to them to provide things like wastewater and water treatment systems. And so we think that we should work with Indigenous bands and with regional authorities, provincial authorities, to negotiate tripartite agreements and to look at new models of governance with Indigenous cooperation and consent to deliver some of these resources on reserve. I'll give you one example. Wastewater treatment often is of a scale that requires a lot of resources and a lot of expertise. When you think about the fact that there are 650,000 band members in Canada on some 600 or so reserves, you're looking at an average band membership on reserve of about 1,000 people. It's about 300 households. Many of these reserves are in rural and remote communities, and they simply don't have access to the resources necessary to run a wastewater treatment or water treatment system. And so by partnering with regional authorities with those bands' consent, we can allow for the federal government to help pay for the delivery, help the Indigenous bands actually consent and manage the system, while have the local regional authority, whether it's a regional municipality or some provincial entity, actually manage the day-to-day operations of the facility. And these tripartite agreements have actually been struck before in a different area, in education. For example, in British Columbia, there are a number of Indigenous bands where there is now tripartite agreements between the Government of Canada, between the province of British Columbia, and between the local Indigenous band for the delivery of on-reserve education. So we think that by working with Indigenous peoples across the country, that new model of governance, particularly for smaller to medium-sized communities, could actually be a way forward to help address some of these long-term issues we see on reserves.
Thank you. Mr. Mendicino.
Well, thank you very much for the question. And I think all Canadians were shocked at the discovery of the unmarked graves of children in residential schools. And it's a very harsh reminder that not only is this a very painful part of our past, but for Indigenous peoples, very much an agonizing part of the present, and really emphasizes how important it is that we continue to do the work of reconciliation. I will say that when the Liberal government first took the reins of government in 2015, there were 105 water advisories in place. We've lifted 115, and just earlier this week, we announced that more would be lifted. I acknowledge that there is more work to be done there. We have also continued to try to take cases out of court and settle with Indigenous peoples and communities, and I know that there is important progress that is being made there. We also introduced landmark legislation to protect Indigenous languages, which, as Senator Sinclair said, must be one of the originating principles in reconciliation. We introduced landmark legislation to protect the best interests of Indigenous children, because we know that they are overrepresented in foster homes. And by moving forward with these legislative initiatives, we are seeking to reduce those barriers. I will say that at times I have sensed from some of my conservative colleagues some reluctance and hesitancy in even using the word reconciliation, but we recognize the need to fully respect the right to self-determine and to self-govern of Indigenous peoples. That is at the very core of the relationship. I also just want to give a local shout out to an organization that is led by some incredible members of the Jewish community in Facing History. And I think that going forward, it's important that we educate young Canadians and newcomers, work that my department has led under the Truth and Reconciliation Commission by, again, passing legislation to revise the oath of citizenship so that all newcomers, all immigrants are educated at the moment they take that oath about the importance and the significance of our relationship with Indigenous peoples.
Thank you all. And we're moving on to our next major topic. Ellin?
Yep, I'm here, and we're going to talk about Israel and support for Israel. Now, I know there are many perspectives on support for Israel in our community, but the issue of Canada's stance on Israel is an important one for voters. We'd like to start off with showing a video clip. We got a submission from Eric Adelman from Victoria, BC. And so if our tech gurus can play that short video now, and then I'll continue on with my questions.
My name is Eric Adelman. This is a question for Dr. Hal Berman of the NDP. How do you reconcile being a representative of the NDP, whose riding associations voted that the most important issue to be discussed at the NDP convention was the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and whose leader, when asked in a press briefing about the anti-Semitic violence and harassment Canadian Jews were experiencing in May, condemned Israel while neglecting to comment on the anti-Semitic acts?
All right, thank you, Eric. And Hal, over to you.
Thank you. That's a very good question, Mr. Adam. I hope you're able to be listening it as well.
Right.
The question of Israel is one that is often fraught with controversy. And the NDP is often criticized not for the position that it actually takes, but for the positions that are brought to our policy conventions. And maybe it's because we're very transparent about what comes to our policy conventions. But the IHRA definition was not the highest priority resolution that came. In fact, it never made it to the floor of the convention because New Democrats placed more importance on other things, including other human rights issues, other social issues. So it was not something that was discussed. So the issue didn't actually come up in the resolution.
Right, but BDS, excuse me, but BDS did. And I would like you to continue. There was a longer part of that question. How do you, as a Jewish candidate, support a party that is supporting BDS and criticizing and condemning arms sales, weapon sales to Israel, and calling it illegally occupied territories? How do you reconcile that position for your listeners?
So I think it's really important to be clear and accurate. There is no resolution, and the NDP does not support BDS. We do not think that it is appropriate. There has been no resolution.
I'm sorry, that is not correct, and we reported on it.
Yeah,
there was
resolution I know.
Passed.
If you'll allow me to finish, because this is probably more than just a soundbite. The resolution that was passed talked about restricting trade from areas that were occupied by Israel, not restricting trade with Israel itself. And the BDS movement is actively trying to restrict all trade, all intellectual cooperation with Israel itself, and we do not support that. We don't think it's the right thing to do. And there are some people in every party who probably do support BDS. However, in each party, decisions are made. Ours are made democratically, and we do not support BDS. So how do I reconcile?
Do you personally support BDS?
Pardon me?
Do you personally support BDS?
No, I do not support BDS. Jagmeet Singh does not support BDS. We do not support it because it's not good for anybody involved in the conflict. It's not going to help the Palestinians. It's not going to help the Israelis. It is not a good thing. So we do not support it.
We're going to move on. I appreciate you answering his question. We only have 2 minutes per person, and we've been going a little bit long, and we still have a lot to get to. Appreciate you taking that on. I'd like to ask Mr. Mendicino about UNRWA. We've been covering this issue. It's a government policy that the Liberals reinstated funding for the UN Refugee and Relief Works program in the West Bank, Gaza, and many countries around Israel and the Middle East, $200 million funding. It has been a very controversial policy. The previous government and Donald Trump stopped funding. Even Karina Gould, your Minister of International Development, was concerned about some of the educational materials that were being used in the schools. So why is your government continuing to fund UNRWA instead of finding other ways to help Palestinians?
Well, I want to begin by saying that there is a strong consensus that Canada needs to play a role in fostering peace in the Middle East, and that's why we're delivering humanitarian aid, which is focused on education and healthcare and social services for the innocent civilians, children, and families who live in the Gaza, so that we can give them a chance for peace and Israel a chance for peace. And we should all be united in that objective. I want to make it clear that we are concerned about the incidents that we've heard. As you just mentioned, Minister Gould has pointed out that on every occasion where there has been a report, that we have made sure that there was greater transparency and accountability on the part of UNRWA. And indeed, we even withheld funding for a period of time until we got concrete assurances that those incidences would be addressed. For example, there were a number of staffers that were dismissed as a result of their misconduct. But we also have to acknowledge that in the current forum, that UNRWA, as imperfect as it is the vehicle through which we are accomplishing that important humanitarian objective, which is to try to foster peace by providing education and health and social services. I will just say that we will continue to demand more oversight, accountability, and transparency. And I'll also point out, I know my conservative friends say that they would defund UNRWA, but a careful reading of their platform does not rule out continuing to fund UNRWA if there are reforms. And so that's what the fine print says. And I think it's important to also just point that out. But we will continue to demand those reforms so that we can advance those humanitarian objectives.
So speaking of UNRWA and support, I do want to redirect just a little bit. And many of these positions that we've articulated with regards to Israel are by no means universal in the Jewish community. Increasingly, we see people in the community taking a very principled stance that places significant weight on the plight of the Palestinian people as a fundamentally Jewish issue. And Canadian foreign policy is no longer something as facile as unconditional support for Israel. I'd like to address Mr. Chong, actually, and then if anybody else has a comment, I would like to hear from them as well. But your party is perceived often as one of these parties that is really, we believe in unconditional support for Israel. I've seen flyers from various, ridings that are not necessarily Jewish ridings that have extremely local issues, except for one line at the bottom that says, we support Israel and we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. That seems to be at odds with actually what you have in the platform, which has extensive plans to support Palestinian statehood and through the IMF and not necessarily through the UN itself. I would like to hear you address the people who are balancing this idea of, well, we're Jewish and yet we still recognize the incredible plight that the Palestinian people have and our responsibility towards them.
Well, Abby, thank you for the question. In short, we believe Canada should do both robustly support our democratic ally and partner in the region, the State of Israel, by, for example, suspending funding to UNRWA if there's anti-Semitic tropes and anti-Semitism in the curriculum. If we're going to stand up for anti-Semitism here at home, we also have to stand up for it abroad. Both Canada's domestic and foreign policy should reflect our values. It means also doing things such as standing up for Israel's right to defend itself. But at the same time, we also believe in supporting the aspirations of the Palestinian people. We believe in supporting a two-state solution, which is why we've outlined some measures that we think are constructive in helping the Palestinians achieve that aspiration. So we'll do things, as you mentioned, like set aside create at the International Monetary Fund a trust account that would be there for the Palestinian people to use upon the arrival of a two-state solution. So it's an incentive for negotiations to start and to arrive at that two-state solution. We're also supportive of continuing to provide humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people through various mechanisms, provided that that aid is consistent with our respect for human rights, our belief in democracy, and our belief in the rule of law. And so we think that we can do both of those things. Strong support for a democratic partner in the Middle East, the State of Israel, the only Jewish homeland in the entire world, and at the same time support the aspirations of the Palestinian people for a two-state solution. We don't think those two things are mutually exclusive.
Thank you. Are there, because it's a bit of a redirect, is there anybody that has a brief comment? Hal, Dr. Berman.
Yeah, so we support a two-state solution as well, or any solution that the two sides come to. And we really feel that Canada should be a catalyst for peace. And if Canada chooses one side or the other side, we take ourselves out of the game. We are no longer seen by the other side as a legitimate mediator. So when Stephen Harper called Israel a shining light in a sea of darkness, no matter whether or not you agree with that statement, what that says is that Canada is not interested in being a broker for peace. We're choosing a side. And if that's the way you want to go in foreign policy, then that's the way you go. New Democrats feel that we should be promoting peace and acting as a catalyst for that.
Thank you. Do you have a point, Mr. Mendicino?
I'll just say very briefly that, again, having visited Israel and Jerusalem, I will tell you that I am very assured of the centrality of Jerusalem to the Jewish people, and its impact on me on a very personal level will endure. I also think that what you're hearing across party lines is that there is a strong consensus to continue on with our foreign policy of pursuing a just and lasting peace through a two-state solution, no matter how elusive that goal may be. And indeed, it has been extremely difficult. But I also want to add that under the Liberal government over the last number of years, of which I and many of my friends and colleagues have played an instrumental role in, we have tangibly and concretely strengthened the relationship between Canada and Israel by expanding trade, and specifically in the context of the innovation and tech sector. We have expanded our collaboration on national security and public safety through memoranda of agreements. And I believe that going forward, that we should continue to find ways to strengthen the people-to-people ties between our two countries through immigration policies. And, you know, as the son of an immigrant family, and as the minister who has had the privilege to carry that portfolio, I know that immigration is not only an economic driver for our country and will help drive our prosperity and full potential, but it is very much the way in which we will continue to enrich our social fabric. And of course, the Jewish community is just a phenomenal part of that narrative.
Thank you. I want to move on to a next topic, which is just foreign policy in a broader context. You know, within the Jewish community, we often hear this phrase, never again. And there are many people who invoke that phrase to ensure that there is a Jewish Holocaust that would never happen again. And there are many others who understand it in a wider context that recognize that any Holocaust should not happen, any form of genocide. And you know, the two that are really at the forefront of our minds right now is what's going on with the Uyghurs in China and any potential genocide in Afghanistan that could potentially be averted with any sort of quick action. I'd like to give everybody 1 minute because I do want to move things along to answer what role should the Canadian government have in these global issues, both in terms of on-the-ground action and diplomacy, as well as the opening of our land to refugees. I'd like to start with Mr. Chong, followed by Mr. Berman and Mr. Mendicino.
Well, thank you, Avi, for the question. Canada needs to play a leadership role, just like those Canadian soldiers did as the pointy end of our foreign policy so many years ago when they defended my father in Hong Kong against fascism and when they liberated my Dutch mother and her family from Nazi tyranny in Western Europe. We have to stand on principle. And this government, this current government, has not. They shamefully abstained from the vote recognizing the Uyghur genocide that's taking place in Xinjiang province. Some 12 million Uyghur Muslims are being persecuted with detention camps, with forced labor, with sterilization, mass sterilizations, and a whole range of other genocidal activities. We as a country cannot turn a blind eye to these atrocities. And with Afghanistan, the government needs to do a much better job of minding the store on that file, evacuation of the Afghan and Turk for the last decade and more. And unfortunately, the government ignored the request because they were focused on an election. And so we abandoned those people that were so helpful in supporting Canada during the war and its aftermath. We have to do better on our foreign policy. Canada needs to stand for things in the world to ensure that never again is not just an empty slogan, but is actually backed up by real action.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Berman, Dr. Berman.
So you may or may not be aware that my mother is a Holocaust survivor and that I lost half of my family that I never met in the Holocaust. Most of my grandmother's family perished. So this is something that is very dear to me. My wife is also a refugee. She came to Canada as a refugee. So to me, it's very important that Canada fight for human rights in a very big way. And I was very disappointed when at the climax of a crisis in Afghanistan, rather than getting to work and getting people out, Justin Trudeau called an election. Very disappointed. And I think no matter what he says, taking your focus away from that to be an election, it doesn't allow you to do the job right. In 2016, I visited Xinjiang in China, and I met many Uyghurs, and I got to immerse myself in the culture. It's an amazing culture, and it hurts me to see what's being done to Uyghurs in China. And I think Canada needs to be much more forceful in condemning it. I think we're putting trade and dollars before people's lives, and I think that has to stop.
Thank you. And Mr. Mendicino.
Well, In fact, I'd like to begin just by thanking Mr. Chong for his advocacy on human rights, and when it comes to calling out genocide. And I know that it comes from a very personal background. So thank you, Michael, for your advocacy. And I will say, with regards to the Uyghurs, that Canada is leading. We are condemning the treatment of Uyghurs, and we have done so repeatedly. In fact, recently, as you know, we led a resolution at the Human Rights Council in Geneva where we did the same thing, using the most strong language to condemn the human rights violations against the Uyghur people, calling for access to UN investigators, and getting 44 countries to sign on to that resolution. We also imposed sanctions on officials in Xinjiang. So despite any of the blowback that we're receiving, Canada is continuing to lead. And I just want to say to everyone watching that on Afghanistan, that we stand in solidarity with the people of Afghanistan, that in the face of nearly impossible circumstances, we reinserted our military after Canada took the difficult decision of withdrawing from Afghanistan 10 years ago. And thanks to the way in which they were able to carry out their responsibilities, we were able to evacuate roughly 3,700 people, the vast majority of whom are Afghan refugees under our special immigration measures program. And not only that, but we are continuing to get Afghan refugees out. Again, despite the volatility, the unpredictability, and the chaos on the ground, we are doing everything that we can, working around the clock. We were the first country in the world to announce a humanitarian resettlement program that focused on women, on girls, on LGBTI, on religious minority, and on other targeted vulnerable populations. I would submit that is the kind of leadership that Canada has shown and will continue to show, and we will do this in partnership with Canadians. And this is very important work that we are committed to continue doing.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to our next topic, Ellin.
Yep, we just want to do some quick fact-checking, live fact-checking. It should be pointed out that while Mr. Chong has been personally sanctioned by the Chinese government for his moving of the motion in February this year to condemn Chinese atrocities in Xinjiang as a genocide, Mr. Mendicino, along with his fellow cabinet ministers, chose to abstain in the vote while the rest of the Parliament of Canada voted unanimously to call this a genocide. Now, I'm going to move on to climate change. We have a limited amount of time, but it has been said that if COVID wasn't the main pandemic right now that people are worried about, many people have been calling climate change as the most important issue facing our world right now. The environment, as you know, is a Jewish issue as well as a universal one. The Jewish people are now entering what in the Bible is called a Shemitah year, which is the way to you let the land lie fallow and regenerate for a year. We did receive a video question from a well-known Canadian Jewish youth environmentalist named Hannah Alper, who's been an outspoken activist calling for government action on saving the planet for her generation. So if we could play the little clip there, and then we'll have the three of you talk to what she asks. Please play the clip.
Hi, my name is Hannah Alper, and for the first time this year, I voted and it felt awesome. As a youth activist, I've been an advocate for the issues of my generation that I'm passionate about and for the voices of young people, whether they can vote or not. What will you do to advocate for the voices of young people and make our voices heard and take action on the causes that we are passionate about?
Thank you so much, Hannah. So we'd like to have a discussion on this. Mr. Berman of the NDP, would you like to start?
I think that the crux of the matter is that we have to leave this earth for young people like Ms. Alper. I'm getting old now, I'm over 50, but what we do now is going to have a very big impact on how our children and our grandchildren live on this earth. From that point of view, we have to leave oil in the ground. We can't keep increasing our production. We can't buy pipelines. We can't keep increasing our emissions. We have to actually take strict action. We have to stop subsidizing fossil fuel companies. To the other part of the question, which is how do we empower young people? Well, in high school, people are learning all about civics. And they're becoming active. I have volunteers in high school right now on my campaign. There's no reason why they shouldn't be voting as well. And so we advocate lowering the voting age to 16 to allow more young people to vote. Now, I know that other parties may be afraid of this because young activists tend to be more on the left, but I think that with a mixed member proportional representation system that we're still waiting for, one of the other broken promises from 2015, these things will empower younger people to live healthy lives well into the future.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
I'll go next.
Go ahead, Michael.
Off you go.
Go ahead.
I feel passionate about this. I think, first of all, thank you for the question. This is a really important issue. I think the first thing we need to do as a country, and I'll take off my partisan hat here and speak very candidly, is that we need to be honest with ourselves as Canadians about what our record is. Canada is one of the highest emitters now in the developed world. And in fact, on some reports, we are the highest per capita emitters amongst advanced economies, even higher than the United States. The other thing we have to be honest about is that over the last several years, emissions in Canada have continued to rise. I'll just give you one example. In 2016, they were 708 megatons. Today, Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, just several months ago, released the most recent report for Environment Canada, the official numbers for the UN agency that gathers the statistics that show us at 730 megatons at the end of 2019. So we've gone from 708 megatons in 2016 to 730 megatons in 2019. And there's no reason to believe that in 2021 this year or next year, emissions are going to decline in this country. In fact, on the track we're on, emissions are going to continue to rise. So the first thing we need to do is be honest about our record. And look, the previous Conservative government blew through the Kyoto Protocol. They failed to meet the Kyoto Protocol. The current government has failed to meet the Copenhagen targets of last year and is not on track to meeting Paris. So we have to start ratcheting down our rhetoric and actually start some tough action, some tough work on this, making ever more higher commitments. 40% reduction, 50% reduction by 2030 isn't going to get us to the target. We need serious discussions with our allies about carbon border adjustments. We need to coordinate the price on carbon, particularly on the industrial side of the economy with the United States and the European Union. And we need to start to do the heavy lifting on this issue rather than just making ever more grandiose promises about what we're going to do in the next 10 years.
Wouldn't the heavy lifting be related a lot more to the oil in Alberta and the rest of Canada?
That's a great question. But the reality is consumers in this country are just as responsible for the growth in emissions in this country over the last 30 years, as has the oil and gas industry. Well, there is no doubt that our oil and gas sector emissions have grown substantially to about a quarter of all emissions in Canada. The reality is that consumers in this country have equally contributed to the growth in emissions of our society. I'll give you one proof of that. If Canada's population had stayed stable at 1990 levels, at 27.5 million people, we would have largely met our Kyoto Protocol targets, our Copenhagen targets, and we would be well on track to meeting our Paris targets without actually doing anything else. And so consumers are responsible for the growth in emissions as much as the oil and gas sector in Alberta is. And so we have to do both.
Isn't that like calling out the individuals for lung cancer when the cigarette companies were out there peddling this stuff?
Well, I think we need government
action. As a doctor, I'd like to chime in on that. So people who started smoking before they knew it was bad for them probably shouldn't be blamed as much for getting lung cancer. But people who have started smoking in the last 30 years knew what they were getting into and should take some responsibility for quitting smoking so that they don't get lung cancer in the future. And similarly, we need to take responsibility. We need to shift to a green economy. And that scares people in Alberta because they're all oil and gas. And we have to bring those workers with us to the new economy, not abandon them. And we can do that if we stop subsidizing oil and gas and start putting that money into green energy.
I wonder if I might chime in here.
Please do.
Okay. Well, look, despite Michael, your efforts at trying to strike a nonpartisan tone, I think you acknowledge the problem, but you and the Conservative Party have all the wrong prescriptions. I don't place the blame on Canadian consumers for the challenges that we have with regards to climate change. I do think, conversely, that the Liberal Party does have an ambitious plan to tackle one of the big questions of our time by ensuring that we continue to move forward with putting a price on pollution. That's something that Conservative provincial governments, as well as federally, your party has continued to fight. Indeed, Mr. O'Toole says that if elected government, you would go back and revert back to lower targets. We also think as a Liberal Party, we need to protect oceans. We need to move forward by banning single-use plastics. We need to plant 2 billion trees. And we also need to green our infrastructure, because it is that sector that is one of the main contributors to pollution. We should go back to the question. And the question came from Hannah. And she voted for the first time. And I think about her and her future. I think about my 2 daughters' future. I think about doing local park cleanups with them. I think about the project that my daughter Michaela did around protecting marine life and oceans. And I think we all have to be very ambitious and committed to putting into effect the plan that has been laid out in our Liberal platform. It has been looked at by former political rivals, like the former leader of the BC Green Party, Andrew Weaver, and he says it is the only credible party that is on offer right now. So by doing the things that are laid out in our platform, we will move forward on climate change.
Thank you. I'm hesitate to go into another topic because I think we're running close out of time. I do want to mention that this was a very, very big issue for a lot of the voters that I did speak to regarding housing and affordability. I do know that everybody does have a plan in their platform for dealing with the affordability of housing and affordability in general. I do want to apologize that we probably are not going to have enough time to get to that, but I encourage everybody to read platforms and to follow up with your individual candidate if that becomes an issue as well.
Right. And we also have had lots of discussion. I was following along some of the comments you guys have been making in the chat. There was a lot of people have been interested also in the COVID situation and which party has the best plan to get us over the Delta and the Mu. We again will not have time to have a robust discussion because we promised that we would we end on time. But maybe what we can do, Avi, is do a quick 1 minute around before we bring in our closing speaker to just tell us we're talking about COVID. Today was the day there were protests around hospitals and against vaccination on places around Canada, clinics, medical clinics. How does Dr. Berman will go first, Michael, you'll go Mr. Chong, you'll go second, and Mr. Mendicino third. What is the one thing you can tell Canadians about how your party is going to be better than the others in saving us from COVID and moving forward? Dr. Berman first.
In 1 minute, tall order. So the first thing that we can say, and I think all the party leaders came together to say this, is please get yourself vaccinated. It's safe. There's lots of science behind it. There is no experimental vaccine. These are safe vaccines. I'm double vaccinated. Our entire group of candidates had to be vaccinated in order to run. Getting people vaccinated, and I think keeping health restrictions in place where we have outbreaks. So in places like Alberta, where things are running wild, in Ontario, where Delta variant is starting to creep up, we still have to social distance. We still have to wear masks. We still have to stay away from each other enough so that we don't get each other sick. That's
thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Chong, quick.
Well, thank you, Ellin. Quite simply, by working with the 10 provinces and local authorities to cooperate in areas of federal and provincial jurisdiction to get through this. We have to work collaboratively. We have 10. We're a vast country with 10 different provinces, two official languages, numerous different regions, and countless local health authorities. We have to work cooperatively. And I think the second thing that we are committed to doing is to uniting Canadians in coming together on this to beat this pandemic, to beat this virus back. I think that is critically important for the next Prime Minister and the next government. We cannot pit one group of Canadians against another. We can't write off 20% of this country who is unvaccinated and say that they don't matter. We have to try to bridge these gaps, bring together the different groups of this country to get a higher rate of vaccination in a way that's reasonable, in a way that's responsible, in a way that helps us to get to the 90+% vaccination we believe is necessary to beat this pandemic. And that requires leadership. It requires a prime minister who's willing to unite Canadians rather than divide them.
Thank you very much. And finally to Minister Mendicino.
Well, I just want to be clear that every doctor, nurse, and personal caregiver has the right to work in an environment that is safe and free from any intimidation, harassment, violence, or aggression. And that's why earlier today we said we'd introduce a law to ensure that right would be upheld and that there would be no obstruction of essential health services to those Canadians who need to get treated, particularly in a pandemic. I also think that long-term care residents and patients have the right to be protected from the pandemic. So while Mr. O'Toole says that he wants to get Canadians to 90% vaccinated, he won't even say how many of his own candidates are not vaccinated, and has said that they are free to go and canvass and campaign in long-term care homes. I think that that is disappointing and reckless. And finally, just with regards to vaccinations, this is a government that believes that we need smart policy choices like passports and mandatory policies. That's how we're going to continue to get the vaccination rates up. We're currently sitting on top of the world thanks to our procurement, but we need to get them higher. And that's how we're going to finish the fight. And that's how we're going to do all of the other things that we want to do: climate change, reconciliation, and economic recovery.
And that brings us to the end of our time, gentlemen, for the candidates debate itself. Thank you for spending your hour with us to discuss issues of vital importance to Jewish Canadians, as well as the allies who may be watching.
And you were all supposed to say thank you, but okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It was great to be here.
Thank you very much.
Work with us here, people.
Thank you.
All right. And
Thanks for your time.
I'd like to remind everybody that the debate may be over, but there's lots more to come. We'll be moving in just a moment to bring in our guest pundits for their analysis, their hot takes on this debate and the election. And we want your audience and welcome your participation. And but first, I want to bring in Joel Reitman. Joel is the co-chair of CIJA's board of directors, to thank our candidates and to offer brief closing remarks. Joel?
Oh, thank you very, very much for the kind introduction, Ellen. I'd like to thank you and your co-moderator, Avi Finegold, for doing an outstanding job moderating what I thought was a really excellent discussion, and it certainly was civil. CIJA is pleased to work with the CJN on this initiative. If you haven't yet subscribed to the new CJN, I encourage you to go to thecjn.ca and add your name. I also encourage you to follow CIJA's work. To learn more, visit CIJA.ca. Subscribe to our emails or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The Canadian Jewish community cares deeply about Canadian democracy. Jews have been contributing to Canadian society for more than 250 years. We contribute because we deeply care about Canada, a place we are grateful to call our home. We also contribute because as Jews, we know that it is critical that our voices be heard by Canadian policymakers. We all know anti-Semitism knows no borders. While Canada has been and remains one of the best places in the world in which to be Jewish, that does not mean we can relax our vigilance. Jews know one of the most effective ways to preserve the quality of Jewish life in Canada and combat anti-Semitism is to express ourselves through our democratic process. I encourage everyone watching to vote on September 20th. And there are still some advanced polling options available, which you can learn about on CIJA's website. To Dr. Hal Berman, the Honourable Michael Chong, and the Honourable Marco Mendicino, on behalf of Jeff Rosenthal, my co-chair of the National Board of CIJA, the teams at the CJN and CJA, everyone watching, and myself, I would like to express our gratitude. We thank you not only for participating in tonight's discussion, but also for caring enough about this great country to offer to serve as candidates for public office. Without people like you, we would not enjoy a country like Canada. Thank you. Back to you, Ellen, for what promises to be an interesting post-debate analysis.
That's right. Thank you so much, Joel, for the kind words. Thank you, everyone. Stick around. We've said goodbye to our candidates, but now we have some homework for you to do for the next 90 seconds as our pundits put their microphones on and dry off. We have some poll questions for you, and then we're going to have the results available so our pundits can talk about them. You can do this questions on your, I guess, iPads or laptops or phones or however you're watching. So please type your answers directly into the poll when they appear on your screen. Hopefully we'll have that up shortly. It's supposed to be while we're getting ready. I'm going to introduce to you some of the people who are our pundits and our participants. So first of all, besides myself, who is filling in tonight, I wasn't supposed to be your moderator for this part. I'm Ralph Ben-Murgy, who's the host of Yehubitzville, was supposed to be our host, but unfortunately he was not able to attend at the last minute. So as far as myself, I will be moderating, and we will be bringing in 3 of our CJN personalities as well, 2 of our CJN personalities, pardon me, I'm the 3rd, as well as a CIJA executive. So to join us, we have Rivka Campbell. Rivka hosts the CJN's Rivkush podcast. You got to listen. She is a sought after speaker on Jewish diversity, on Israel, on diversity, equality, and inclusion. She's co-founder of the Jews of Color Canada, and she's executive director of Beit Re'im Synagogue in Vaughan, Ontario. And Rivka is probably zooming in from Tobermory, Ontario. Hi, Rivka. Then we have Josh Lieblein. He came in out of the rain, literally, and you can ask him about that later. He's the CJN's political commentator, former Conservative Party insider. He writes our doorstep postings column during this federal election 44. And a dried off Josh is ready to join us from Cambridge, Ontario. And we'll also welcome from CIJA's Ottawa office, David Cooper, who is Vice President of Government Relations for CIJA, and he didn't get wet. So if you're all there, hello to you all. So the questions that we have, all right, we'll talk about the questions as we get the results, but first let's say hello to all 3 of you. Why don't you say hello to each other, and I'll give you your first topic.
Oh, wow. I'm still unpacking everything I've heard, and speaking first is kind of challenging.
Well, let me tell them what you're going to talk about first.
Yeah.
So let me give you I'll buy you some time, stretch.
Thank you.
But I won't. So the question that we're going to do to our pundits and panelists are what you've listened to our debate for an hour. What was your key takeaway, your gut reaction to what you heard? We'll start with Rivka, and we'll go to Josh and Lieblein, and then we'll take it to David. All right? Does that give you enough time?
Yeah, sure. That
okay, here we go.
2 more seconds. So thank you. Really and truly, I was trying to see if I could distinguish between the party lines. And actually, there was a lot of blurring and a lot of, to be expected political correctness. So then I put on the hat of being me, Rivka, Jew of color, first generation Canadian, and that. And one of the tenets that I hold to that applies to us as a Jewish people and to people of color is not about us without us. So then I use that to determine what exactly are these candidates saying. It felt that they were talking about things that they would do to us or for us. And I kind of wondered, what about the involvement of the people that these things are going to happen to? Not about us without us. And there was one candidate who did make a statement in terms of the Indigenous people that it was important to involve them in the solution. And so that is what I was looking for from the candidates. And again, I'm still unpacking a lot of stuff, but that actually was probably one of my key takeaways.
And I would like to throw it over to Josh. I'm glad you're okay.
Yes, I'm fine. I was able to catch the end of the debate. I did see pretty much what I was expecting. A lot of the 3 candidates were trying to give us something of themselves and something of their party's platform. But what I saw, I noticed that Mr. Mendicino was being pretty hard attacking Mr. Aaron O'Toole, the CPC leader, which I appreciate the other two candidates were able to bring a bit more of a positive energy. It really shows how, and I've been looking at this election throughout the entirety of it, and it really seems that the Liberals are the ones who are finally in the last few days going on the attack. And trying to paint the other two parties as unsafe choices. And even though the CJN tried to keep things civil and keep things moderated, it seemed that it's very hard for one of the candidates to take that and to use some of the messaging they've been told to the attack lines they've been told to use on the other two candidates. So even in a CJN debate where people are more interested in talking about issues, partisan considerations did play a role in this debate from what I saw. And I don't know how, and I see that it didn't really change a lot of people's voting intention based on the numbers. And I really think that for a debate that was hopefully to educate the Jewish community, there was still a lot more crosstalk and attempts to really get the party's messages from above. And that's what I think we saw a lot of here.
All right. You did reference something, so I'll just explain them and then I'll come to you in a second, David. We put those 4 poll questions to you and we have the results. So as soon as David finishes his 1-minute key takeaway, we will reveal your polls unless you can see them live, which I don't think you can. So I'm going to tell you what they are, the results so far. All right, David, you're in Ottawa. You're watching the debate as someone who helped put it together and find the candidates. What was your key takeaway from the CJA point of view?
So my first takeaway was, boy, an hour goes really fast. And I looked at the clock at about 8:50, then saw all the topics that we still had not covered and wanted to cover. So that would really surprise me. But I was very pleased that on the issues of anti-Semitism and on Indigenous affairs, there seemed to be, sort of towards Rivka's point, a lot of unanimity in terms of the policy issues. Not surprisingly, on the issue of Israel, international affairs, and on climate change, we saw more divergence in terms of the different political parties. And that, those are the issues that really are playing out more broadly across Canada, not just in this debate tonight, as key issues where we see some divisions between the political parties.
All right. Before we move on and let you guys sort of go at it on issue by issue, I should tell you that the first question that we asked was, did what you all heard, and I'm talking about those of you who are still with us or watching later online, did what you heard here at this election debate change your voting intention? So you had 3 choices, yes, no, and no impact. And from our tech gurus, the answers were 23% of you said it did change your mind, 41% of you said it did not, and 35% said no impact. Anybody want to talk about these numbers? Josh, you surprised?
No, I'm not really surprised because what we have is a situation where people are just trying to get a thin slice of these people in the parties in a very short period of time. I really don't envy anybody who has to step up on a debate stage and try to condense their platform down to a few quick sound bites. That's the format of the debates. If you want to vote for someone, if you want to trust someone with something as intimate as your vote, you really have to know who they are. And while I appreciate formats like this it's not really a good idea to get this as your first taste of what a candidate is. I really encourage anybody who is leaning towards one of the parties and still hasn't made their mind up to actually talk to and reach out to our candidates and the people who participated in the debate and ask and follow up with them with their questions. And that's been one of the things I've been trying to communicate over the course of this election. And it's really incumbent on each Jew, each member of the Jewish community, and all Canadians to really step up and ask the questions of the parties and the platforms and the candidates. These people are waiting for your questions. And it's great that everybody came and was able to participate. But this is just the first step for you. I hope this isn't going to be your last takeaway for this election, because the format really doesn't suit it all that well if you really want to make it a really, truly informed decision.
You know, what's interesting, guys, and Rivka, the question was, have you voted? The answers are 60% of our audience has already voted. 37 said no, and the rest said will not vote. So that doesn't add up. That's 97, but whatever. Yeah. So 60%, almost 2/3 of our audience has already voted. I already voted. I don't know if you guys have.
I voted. Yeah.
All of you voted?
Yeah,
David
yeah.
too?
I
Okay,
voted.
so what do you make of this? Rivka, you're the executive director of a synagogue. The timing of the election is in the middle of Yontif, or the Jewish New Year.
Exactly.
What do you make of this? That most people have already voted.
That's one of the reasons I already voted, because I looked at the dates and I couldn't figure out how I'd coordinate it. So I went and did a write-in ballot. That was last week. So that's what I had to do to make sure that I got my vote in, because it was quite a bit of juggling. I'm not surprised that a majority has voted of those who answered this poll. I'm also not surprised that in the previous question that the no and the no impact is sitting at 76%, because I don't think people pretty much, I think, have made up their mind, and I don't think anything profound would have changed them. And I would also argue even those that said, yes, their minds were changed, were already leaning one way and probably heard something that made them say, okay, I will, whatever information they got from whatever candidate. And so I think that may have been just a decider. I don't think they flipped from, one candidate to another. I think they just said, okay, I get it. So these numbers should not surprise me at all.
No, in order for there to be a big shift like the one Rivka's describing, there would have had to have been a knockout punch. And that's not what we're really looking for here in this kind of debate. This is more of an informative, first of all, Mr. Chong and Dr. Berman didn't allow any opportunities for that. That was probably one of their strategies going in, which is why they didn't respond to some of the things that Mr. Mendicino was saying about their respective platforms. And the other thing is that that's not what people are really going for. You have to really be careful if you're going to do something to really change people's minds, because it's a calculated risk. You could end up boomeranging back on you. So I'm very glad that we didn't really have a lot of people trying to change a lot of people's minds. That would require something really dramatic and something that would, even in the event that most people hadn't voted, were making up their minds. I really don't think we're going to see a stampede one way or the other. This election is going to come down to who can get out their vote. And while this was great to have a few questions answered in the overall scheme of who's going to win and who's going to lose, if you want to make that change, then I would recommend you get out to your local campaign and volunteer. That's what's going to move people's votes.
I'm encouraged that
sorry, David, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm encouraged that 60% of people have gone out to vote, because it demonstrates that people have heard, the information that we've tried to put out and others have tried to put out about advanced polls because of the Jewish holidays. And people have obviously heard this and it's resonated. I'm not surprised about, change of vote. And I think we're a very literate community, and people in the community have already read a lot, heard a lot, watched the debates, the the leadership candidate debates. So,
which were not as good as ours, I have to say, because we let them talk. I'm just saying. A little shout out for civility.
I'm still trying to digest the English one. I actually enjoyed the craziness of it.
All right, but David, we have a question that our audience, thank you for answering. Do Jewish issues play a role in how you vote? So here's what the breakdown is. You can see them, but I don't think our audience can. 56% said Jewish issues do play a role in how they vote. 6% said they don't. 27% said sort of, and then 9% said all issues are Jewish issues. So Rivka, you want to start with that?
Absolutely. I'll just speak from my own perspective. Of course it does. Being Jewish is everything that I am. So obviously I'm going to look to how issues in the Jewish community are going to be handled by the various parties that we have. Just like, I don't think it's so unusual to have that kind of statement, just like I'm sure, issues for people of color, they look to see, and they would say those are important issues. How are you going to deal with that? Issues within the Indigenous community, of course, those are going to be important. So absolutely, 100%. I would think I would be disingenuous if I said it didn't.
So I would say, I find that encouraging, because it's people admitting, at one time we thought, the Jewish community had two issues. It was Israel and it was anti-Semitism. And nowadays we realize that there is a Jewish perspective when it comes to climate change, perspectives on issues like palliative care, affordable housing. So for people, whether they vote conservative, NDP, liberal, or green, or whatever, how they vote, should reflect some sort of values within themselves. And if they're watching this, I would guess that Judaism is somehow connected to their lives, and that gets reflected in the way they vote.
I agree, David. And I would caution, though, that a lot of the parties do tend to make a bit of broad generalizations about what the Jewish community, quote unquote, wants. And you'll see things like 10 mentions of Israel in the conservative platform and no mentions whatsoever in the liberal platform. So, and I, through my work through doorstep posting, I've tried to highlight sort of juicy campaign issues where someone tweets something ill-advised or problematic as far as the Jewish community is concerned. But the truth is that going around and looking for Jewish issues can be a bit of a fool's errand. If you are someone who's going to vote based on Israel, you pretty much know which party you're voting for. If you're someone who is voting based on
which party is that? Which party is that? Which party is best on? Okay, let's break it down. So which party is the strongest on support for Israel for people who that is the most important of the four? Because we don't care what the bloc says because they're not going to be in government.
The most vocal party in support of Israel is the Conservative Party of Canada, but that doesn't really take the entire Jewish community into account. There are many people who want to vote based on many people in our community who don't like Israel and want to vote based on what some other party may feel or what they believe might be the position of a party in the near future. So if someone is voting NDP, there are plenty of people who are part of the NDP or other parties who want to see a more anti-Israel tone taken. Whether that's going to happen or not depends on whether the party leadership decides to commit to that. They have a signal to do that. So what I mean is the people the people who have strong opinions on Israel know how they're voting. And people who want to have a more balanced perspective on Israel might vote liberal. But I mean, if we're thinking of a specific issue that affects all Jews one way, it's not that all Jews vote one way. It's that if Jews don't find someone who is speaking their language, they may end up voting for the PPC or someone else. What I mean is that for Jewish issues to play a role in how you vote, we may know what those issues are and people know what their stance is and they're not changing it. So there's going to be some sort of connection between how you feel about Jewish issue X and party issue X, and those two get overlap, and that produces your voting. So that's probably more nuanced take on do Jewish issues play a role in how you vote.
David,
Ellen, just to maybe sum that point up is, we're often consulted by a lot of the political parties about what issues or what should go into their portfolio that should resonate with the Jewish community. And often, as Josh is maybe alluding to, is there's an assumption that it's all about Israel. And we have to sometimes educate the different political parties that there is so much diversity in the Jewish community and different issues resonate with different people. So don't make any clear assumption about what the Jewish community is all about.
That is an excellent way of summing that up, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Rivka, I'm not sure if you all have read the Conservative Party platform. I read it thanks to our crack researchers who put it together. Victoria Redden and Karen Gross and Talia Cleot put it together. And there's a giant section on support for Palestine and the Palestinians and how much money they're going to give. This is in the Conservative Party, and they're not talking about it to our audience. And that was a surprise to me, because in Stephen Harper's world, we didn't talk about the Palestinians. In Trump's world, we didn't talk about it. So is that a change in who they think is going to vote for them now? Because basically Jews are not counting anymore in the political calculations of the conservatives or other parties, whereas they did before in terms of a blanket vote. I know, David, you said it's a nuanced, diverse vote. So does that reflect in the new Tory platform?
So if I could say, were you asking Rivka or?
Oh, no, go ahead.
I'm asking you, and then we'll talk about Rivka.
Yeah,
so
please.
I've talked to some of the conservatives about, the party platform and that particular section that you're speaking about. And I think it's a recognition that they wanted to clearly signal both to the Jewish community and to other communities, and maybe specifically the Muslim community, that they don't look at the Israel-Palestinian issue as a zero-sum game, that it's not binary, it's not, you have to be pro-Israel, but you can't be also supportive of the Palestinian national movement. So I think by putting that section in, it was a nod to the Muslim community and to maybe other elements within the Jewish community that want a more nuanced, conservative position on Israel.
Yes, agreed.
Hey, Rivka. Oh, sorry. Let me bring Rivka.
Well, I don't think I can say it any better. And, but I do hear what you said, Ellin, that it wasn't even touched upon. And there was a moment where the conservative candidate had every opportunity. And I think that was the point, and I might be misquoting, where one of the others said, Israel is, I think it was the doctor who said that the conservatives have always said Israel's the light. And he basically alluded that the conservatives only speak of Israel, Israel, Israel. And that was his opportunity to say, well, in our platform, we address that. So it feels like, while it is in their platform, maybe it was deliberately not mentioned, because we could have gone down a whole other pathway with that also.
Absolutely. And we are seeing in our debate, perhaps there was an unwillingness to touch on the issue and kind of make it sort of like, well, what this party says this other party says that. We're not trying, again, like I said before, we're not trying to have one candidate try and knock another candidate out in this particular debate. And of course, the Conservative Party platform would have in 2021 would be a bit more balanced than it was in the Harper years, because they are trying to expand their tent and they are trying to get into government. And again, it's more of a trying to soften off the edges and try to appeal to everyone while still trying at the same time. It's a big balancing act. And I've talked about this on Bonjour Chai a couple of times with Avi and Alana, that these parties have to sort of thin slice things and make it a bit of a balancing act and sort of appeal to everyone else, like Dave was saying, trying to sort of pick up votes wherever they are available. So even though the Jewish community is pretty well decided one way or another, they still need to protect themselves from attacks from the other parties if there's an opportunity. So what we saw today was a bit of that balancing act as the candidates tried to keep all of that juggling as they were going along.
And as you both mentioned, the progressive wing of the Jewish community, who we also represent. It's not just all one side, blind support for Israel. And that is a large portion, especially of our younger community. I'm going to give you all one last minute, each of you, to go around. For those who are undecided voters, what one tip do each of you have, advice for them as we head towards September 20th, starting with Josh?
Well, one of my favorite things to do during the campaign is I'm usually doing door knocking at the last minute and trying to drive people to the polls. If you can volunteer, this may be some crazy idea for some people, but if you have any time on E-Day, I know some people may not be able to because of the holiday, but if you are able to, just watch this machine in action. And you can even go around from one campaign to another and sort of observe it happening. And just see all the work that's done in getting people from who haven't voted yet from their house to the polling station. And you can evaluate the campaigns based on how frantic it is and how hard they're working. And these people are really working hard to earn your vote. It's really amazing. And if you can spend any time listening to or watching this process in action, if you're not swayed on your vote by then, this will change your mind.
Well, if it's any indication, my phone has literally been getting robocalls all day long from a bunch of different parties. I already told them I voted already, but it's neck and neck. So what one piece of advice, Rivka, would you give to somebody who hasn't decided what to do?
Wow. This is an interesting year. And I think it's really important, it might sound pat, but I think it's really important to do your homework, do your research, and ask the tough questions. Your vote is valuable. And I see it. I see even with my kids, this is the first time ever we've had a thorough conversation about the upcoming elections. And so the interest is there. People are hungry to find out information. And I say, gather as much information as you can, be comfortable in your decision, and go out and vote, because that term, every vote matters. It really does. And I think it's important that they do so.
Thank you. I mean, nobody wanted an election. Trudeau said this was an important time to have a discussion. So at least at your table, it's prompted a discussion. I know it has in our house as well. Now, we have only another 90 seconds left to finish off. So David, quickly, what one piece of advice should you give to the Jewish community?
Yeah, so I'm going to riff off both Josh and Rivka and say, one, to Josh's point, get involved. I know, you can read the party platforms and everything like that, but the most fun, the best way to get involved in the political sector is by getting involved in a campaign in the future. Maybe it's too late for this one, but it's really important to get involved. Two, read the party platforms, whichever one speaks to your values. I wouldn't pick one issue. You should look at all the parties holistically, and whichever one speaks to you, that's the one that you should support, to Rivka's point.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of you guys. I want to remind everyone who's still with us or watching later to check out thecjn.ca for more coverage. If you want to rewatch the debate, it'll be posted on the CJN's Facebook page and on our YouTube channel when it's rendered. It'll also be on my podcast tomorrow, the CJN Daily, later this week, Bonjour Chai, and there'll be more. Josh, you will be doing some columns, doorstep columns, I'm sure, on the CJN.ca website.
Check them out.
And also on some podcasts. If you like what you've seen and heard, please support the CJN by signing up for membership. Just go to thecjn.ca, all one word, and sign up. Thank you all for tuning in. Shana Tova, Gamar Chatima Tova, and goodbye.